Welcome to a Legendarium special about Eugene Francois Vidocq, the man who inspired Les Miserables. In this episode, we will learn about the criminal-turned-police officer who inspired Victor Hugo's Jean Valjean and Inspector Javert. One of the most famous literary works on earth is Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. The sprawling epic tale originated as an 1862 novel about love, revenge, and redemption set against the bloody backdrop of post-revolutionary Paris. Episodes from Hugo's own life helped to inspire his novel. These include the author witnessing a police officer arresting a man who stole a loaf of bread in 1829, and Hugo himself saving a prostitute from wrongful arrest in 1841. The book's lead hero is Jean Valjean, an ex-convict who turns his life around and becomes a successful businessman and philanthropist. However, Valjean's life and works are endlessly disrupted by the obsessed police inspector Javert, who refuses to believe that a man can change. Strikingly, one man helped to inspire both Jean Valjean and Inspector Javert, namely Eugene Francois Vidocq. He was born in 1775 to a baker and his wife who lived in the town of Arras, located in northern France. The elder Vidocq wanted his son to become a baker like him, but the boy proved more interested in hanging out with soldiers and sharing in their little adventures. When young Vidocq stole and pawned the family's silver, he spent some time in prison. Only 10 days after his release, the 14-year-old Vidocq accidentally killed his fencing instructor, which the law frowned upon. He then stole his family's savings and disappeared to avoid the attention of the authorities. While on the run, Vidocq lost his savings when he became entangled with a young actress. Vidocq then joined the 3rd Dragoon Regiment, a cavalry unit in the French army. The army exposed him to battle-hardened soldiers whose exploits further encouraged Vidocq's risk-taking ways. In his first 6 months, Vidocq fought 15 duels and killed several of his opponents. He also distinguished himself on the battlefield, but his bravado soon got the best of him. At the age of 17, Vidocq struck his commanding officer when the man refused to meet him for a duel. The officer, somewhat miffed, then ordered Vidocq hung. To avoid his appointment with the hangman, Vidocq fled to his hometown of Arras. By that time, the French Revolution began to reshape his homeland. This period of radical social and political upheaval caused the collapse of the monarchy that ruled France for centuries. During this time, traditional ideas of hierarchy regarding the monarchy, aristocracy, and the church were replaced with ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, enforced by the guillotine. Those who opposed the revolution went on the revolutionary diet, in which they lost 8 pounds from the neck up in the time it took to pull a rope. Both male and female dissidents routinely went to jails to await their fate without the benefit of a trial. Vidocq defended one such condemned woman, and the revolutionaries saluted his moral courage by throwing him in jail. Over the next several years, Vidocq went in and out of jail, being arrested for brawls, petty crimes, and once forging parole papers for a fellow prisoner. Thanks to his talent for disguising himself, Vidocq frequently escaped and disappeared back into society. Yet when Vidocq learned that his warden falsely blamed a guard for deliberately allowing him to go, Vidocq surrendered himself to save the man from punishment in 1794. This has a striking parallel to a scene in Les Miserables where Valjean exposes himself to the court to save an impoverished beggar who has been mistaken for Valjean himself. For his honesty, the court sentenced Vidocq to 8 years hard time, first in prison and then in the naval galleys. After only 8 days' captivity, Vidocq stole a sailor's clothes and walked past 2 guards. He then found freedom on the high seas, serving for several years on a privateering expedition. The law caught up with Vidocq again when he walked off the vessel and into the waiting arms of the authorities. Vidocq then went to Toulon prison, a wretched place reserved for the most hardened and dangerous criminals. Confined to his cell, beaten regularly, and surrounded by disease and squalor, Vidocq could only bide his time. His use of disguises had become well known, and his guards watched him like a flock of hawks. So Vidocq befriended another inmate, a wealthy master thief who bartered with guards for better conditions. This friend obtained the key to Vidocq's shackles, and Vidocq jumped out the prison window. Unfortunately, he had become a victim of his own success. His notoriety grew so great that living as a fugitive became increasingly difficult. Often on the move, Vidocq worked as a butler, privateer, and businessman. During this time, he witnessed the execution of a fellow criminal in Paris and finally realized that would be his end, sooner or later. So in 1809, Vidocq contacted Jean-Henri, head of the criminal department in Paris. The 30-year-old fugitive proposed that in exchange for amnesty, he would become a police informant who mingled with the Paris underworld to prevent crimes. The Paris of Vidocq's time was crammed with gaming halls, brothels, and saloons frequented by cheaters, thieves, and murderers. Brawls and drunkenness abounded. Excrement paved the streets. When people found corpses on the road, they laid them out in the morgue so they could be claimed. Vidocq suggested creating a unit that monitored former convicts and known criminals. This plainclothes detective unit had free rein over the entire city, and this unprecedented access thwarted criminals who escaped justice simply by going into another precinct, knowing that the bitterly competitive police would not allow officers from another precinct to pursue criminals on their turf. In time, Vidocq hired 28 former criminals with the toughness and street smarts needed for the job. After 10 years, this force, the Sûreté, cut Paris crime by 40%. Victor Hugo would use the Sûreté's methods like disguises and undercover work when creating his infamous antagonist, Inspector Javert. And not only did Vidocq create undercover police work, he pioneered other techniques like plaster casting for shoe imprints, fingerprinting, and securing crime scenes. In 1828, Vidocq grew famous enough to publish his memoirs, and then retired from police work so that he could found a plaster manufacturing company. Sadly, Vidocq's company went bankrupt in 1831, and then he founded the world's first private detective agency, the Office of Information. Unfortunately, when Vidocq reverted to criminal methods to get information about finding criminals, the company was forced to close. Vidocq failed to regain his footing, and he spent his later years in abject poverty before he died in 1857. Only a few years after his death, Victor Hugo used parts of Eugene Vidocq's life to create his legendary novel Les Miserables, and thus Eugene Vidocq would live on forever. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.